a set of updates here, and I'll just go right into the first one. And it's a slightly different order than the agenda that I have the slides set up. First speaker is Paul Baker from New York State Horticultural Society, the industry's contact agent in Albany and Washington.
Thank you. Well, I want to keep this very brief. Mark asked me to update everybody on what the current labor situation is. Let's talk about people on the farm first. I'm very pleased with the awareness that the industry now has of the H2A program. Our area seems to know how to navigate it. I think it's the only way to word it. It is a difficult task, but we are doing it. I do occasionally, last week I got out, I talked to a couple growers that are not in the program, and I tried to educate them as to the opportunities, because their downfall is what everybody knows. That, yeah, I have help, but I don't know how long it's going to be here. And, it's a day-to-day worry, but I think it's a process. And I think right now, personally, I'm not advocating H2A, but I would say if you're going to be a commercial grower, you need to be very knowledgeable. And if you don't have a very established crew, you need to be looking at it. With that being said, some tips. I went and made several calls yesterday, and one of the things that came up was that even long-standing crews, domestic crews that have come up from like Texas and that, you need to be in touch with these, because they're hearing the national news. The national news is New York State is very, very dangerous place for health reasons to be in. And you need to educate your workers that are maybe down in Texas or Mexico that, yes, that maybe the hot spot might be New York City, but we're inviting you to our farms. That being said, once the growers get, whether they're H2A or domestic workers, into their farm, and I'm sure Mark's going to be talking about this and other people, you need to really step up and have good conversations about health reasons for the virus, the use of the mask. If you're going to be leaving, go to shopping, you absolutely must be wearing the mask, and it's just essential. People have asked me where we're at with the hearings. The hearings, like everything else on the last bill that was passed last January, they have to have 4 hearings, and then they make their final assessment in November. We are still scheduled. We only got 1 hearing in, but we're still scheduled to have some more, but no one knows exactly when we'll be allowed to meet and have these hearings. I've been waiting, thinking that maybe they'll have a hearing similar to what we're doing today on Zoom, but that has not been the case. But my understanding, I talked with Maureen Torrey for the vegetable industry, and she's like I am. She feels they will happen, and when they will, we will be there to cover the basis for you. Again, I'm very pleased with the maturity, and that's the way I would say it is, the maturity and the awareness of our industry as to how to navigate bringing in help. You need to reach out to the New York State Department of Health, DOL, if you have any questions on housing, as far as if someone does get sick in your program, there are making arrangements for that. With that being said, one complaint that I got from several growers when I talked to them was, you need to stress to your help that their housing is their house. They do not have to let everybody that knocks on their door, no matter where it is, into their house. Just like in my own home, right now with this COVID going on, we're very restrictive as to who we bring into our own home. The workers need to be reassured that they have a right to restrict who comes in or talks to them after hours. This could be a real problem because you have so many people trying to reach out right now to the workers. You need to reassure them of their rights. Mark, that's pretty much it. Again, I think if you have established good domestic help, be very diligent in talking to them about the safety and the precautions of coming in, but like in your H2A program, we did have some issues with transportation, but we seem to be getting through them, especially coming out of Jamaica. The weather kind of, in my opinion, kind of cooperated with us because it was kind of cold, and if the workers got there, they wouldn't have got much done anyway. But when I've talked to many growers that are in, especially going on the Jamaican program, that help is funneling in. I guess with that, I just leave it, Mark, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Okay, so now I'm going to go through kind of a crop update for the area and the country, and then Matt Wells will add a little bit from the sales and packing perspective on their take on the situation. And I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, and I'll start from Western New York and move outwards. And I think this is what everybody's most familiar with. Some freeze damage, but it varies block by block. At the same time, it looks like it may be a good bloom in an on year with good pollination. So despite freeze damage, it looks like it will be a good solid crop. The whole purpose of these series of meetings is to work with Terrence and Mario and others to try to thread that needle to thin it to the right size to get the right size fruit. And people will have to assess on a block by block basis. A concern for this region and other regions is, will there be any scarring or rusting damage from freeze? It's still a little too early to tell for these things, and what the actual reduction in crop size was. Hudson Valley is really in a similar situation to Western New York. I think people have seen the data on the freeze percentages down there that were sampled. Very similar. It's like a good bloom and potentially a good crop. Champlain Valley was far enough behind in phenology and bud development due to the colder climate that at this point, my understanding is that there don't seem to be any major issues there. But with the warm weather, they're catching up to us quickly with the phenology. Just to go over it, last year and this year, New York State production in June, the Premier Co-op projected the crop would be 31 million bushels. In August, U.S. Apple, 31.5 million bushels. USDA predicted in August 29.8. And the final estimate from the survey in November, the USDA final was 31.4. So it really came out about what they thought. And it was the same as the 5-year average. And most packers in the East are looking to wind up packing of the 2019 crop this month and in June. Sort of these overall trends were more of an effect than the COVID crisis for wholesale apples seems to have weathered it pretty well. Pennsylvania is a similar story. Some freeze damage, it varies block to block, and still too early to tell for, effect on production and scarring and russeting. But the assessment is overall it's a solid crop with good bloom and pollination. Peach crop may have suffered more damage from those early freezes, but I don't have a lot of detail about that. Michigan and the central region, there's some freeze damage, but a lot of blocks are untouched. So perhaps less freeze effect than other states. They're still going to be looking for the same issues. Not a huge crop, but solid is the report that I heard, and good bloom and pollination. So in general, Northeast and Midwest suffered multiple freeze events at various times, and it just really very much on very specific localities and blocks how much things were affected. It's still too early to tell the overall effect of the freeze damage on the size of crop and on any surface damage from freeze. Washington State had an early bloom. It did have some freeze events. The report I heard, it was not a really big crop, but it's a solid crop. And they're also concerned about effects on pack out if there's scarring and rusting damage from freeze damage. Last year, Washington State production, the forecast was 165 by U.S. Apple in August, 171.4 by USDA. And in November, the final was 181 million bushels. It's not a surprise. You could all tell it was a big crop. And that was well above the 5-year average, which was 167. That large crop led to high national crop holdings in December and January. So by May 1st, holdings of fresh and processed were still well over the 2019 values, 21 and 18% May 1st. So kind of effect of the Washington market possibly for the East, that there could be some carryover into the fall to overlap with the 2020 harvest. And also Washington State had an early start to the growing season and the East had a late start. So if that holds out to harvest, Washington State will get a head start on marketing the 2020 crop. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt to give his insight into this.
So just a quick 30 seconds on the market. This past season, the market's been more challenging, and I'm talking about fresh apples. You know, the U.S. apple industry has been in a good run over the last decade, but with these larger crops, you know, we're seeing kind of a downturn in market pricing. And 2019 was probably the first crop that, you know, prices, you know, have come down and are not where we want to see them. You know, at this point, there's no indication with what we know that it would be any different for 2020 crop, but there's a long ways to go. The reason I bring this up, it's just, in my mind, it's more important than ever as growers to do a great job thinning, get the fruit size right, the crop size right, and to grow high quality apples. I really believe if you can do those things well, even in poorer market conditions, you'll still do okay. But again, you got to grow high quality fruit and get the right target fruit size. I just want to finish up with just talking about financial performance of orchards as it relates to fruit size, because we're talking about thinning today. As growers, your goal is return per acre, net return per acre, by whatever variables or means it takes to get there, right? For a processed grower, your goal is generally to achieve a 2.5-inch size apple and put a lot of apples on the tree. Yield the apples up, get tonnage, and do that year in and year out. And that's, from a processing grower perspective, that's the challenge. Put as many on as you can and do it year in, year out. It's a little bit more complicated with fresh apples. You've got several factors that go into returns. You've got the variety, the size, quality, the market in which you sell, and lastly, yield. Again, we're talking about thinning today, so focus on size. The optimal size for fresh apples, generally speaking, in most years, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, you're trying to target a 3-inch apple to a 3 3/8-inch apple, which is roughly an 88 count to a 64 count. If you grow something smaller than a 3-inch apple, which moves you from an 88 to a 100 count apple, you will receive less money for those apples. 100 counts or 3-inch and less apples generally go to the bag market, which consumers and retailers are willing to pay less. Lastly, I'd just like to say, before you start your thinning, and I'm sure some of you have, look at prior year packouts for each of the orchards you're thinning. Look at the fruit size that you were able to achieve and see what you need to do to adjust this season. Maybe it was good, maybe it was too small, or maybe too big, but definitely look at those packouts on an orchard by orchard basis. Also talk to your marketers. If you're not sure what target fruit size you should be trying to receive by a variety, talk to them, get their feedback. And lastly, I'm going to finish up with just a little bit of a soapbox on Honeycrisp. It's the one variety I think that our industry can compete against Washington. Super important to the bottom line. For many farms, Honeycrisp is carrying the financials, and we do and can grow a very good Honeycrisp. Last season, we had generally the Honeycrisp were off in this region. What we see for bloom and initial set looks pretty strong. Many of us are very concerned that we're going to overcrop the Honeycrisp and put ourselves into a very biennial situation. So Honeycrisp are very important to all of us. Be a little bit more aggressive when thinning them. If you don't get them all off with chemical thinning, you need to get in there soon from a hand thinning standpoint. That's all I have, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Okay, we have one more section for business updates, sort of some things related to COVID-19. First thing, H2A guest workers. I'm just going to tack on to what Paul talked about. What I found talking to people right in March and April when things were going down, the industry, actually the entire produce and agricultural industry lobbied all the H2A agencies to say, hey, wait, we need to get people through. So the government made it much more flexible to process visas, so that doesn't seem to be an issue at embassies. But transportation, there's just so many commercial flights coming from Jamaica, and it's an island. Think about that for the fall. You might want to think about getting people here a little bit early, take that into account. There's no way to know if transportation is going to change before then, going to improve, be more flights or not. It looks like it'll be happening, but it might not be exactly the timing we want. Another alternative, and I just talked to somebody the other day who successfully did this, is Citizenship and Immigration Service has provided flexibility to get an H2A worker that was working somewhere else. So they managed to get workers who were ending a contract in California and got them up to New York. So they were already in the country. There's an article about that in Ag Workforce, Cornell site. Hand sanitizer and cloth-based covering distribution. Each county association distributed a lot of hand sanitizer this month earlier. This is all from the government. We anticipate another round of distribution, but to tell you the truth, we just found out when things were happening, like the day that they were happening. But we understand there's going to be another one. So if you have a need or you think you're going to have a need in a month or two, contact your local director, executive director. Contact them by email. That's the surefire way to reach them at this time. New York Forward. I'm sure everybody knows about New York Forward. Early May, the New York Forward plan went into effect. And all businesses must have a written business reopening safety plan. There's a booklet from the state. It's every business. It's even essential businesses that were already open, including agriculture. They have a template that you can just fill in the blanks about how are you going to get enough sanitizer, how are you going to keep social distancing on your farm, and so on. And you can fill that out. It does not need to be submitted. This is not going to be audited. This is something that the state is saying you need to have made a plan and have it written and printed and posted in your office, so that if you had an outbreak, or if you had a customer that complained or a worker that complained, that first thing they say is, well, where's your plan? You say, here's my plan, and I did all these things, so it's not my fault. Just 2 days ago, interim guidance for farms finally came out from New York Department of Ag and Markets. Really waiting a long time for this, because it was just no guidance on how to do specific things on the farms. That's available on the Ag and Market site, which is agriculture.newyork.gov coronavirus. They have a whole bunch of guidance at the bottom of the page, and one of the last ones, because it was just posted a couple of days ago, it's called Guidance for Prevention of and Response to COVID-19 on Farms, but the full name is Interim Guidance, and it links to a PDF. And it does address things to some extent that we didn't have any answers to about housing, quarantining, what the guidance is for vehicles and other things. This is guidance. It is not a regulation. It is guidance to tell you what the best way is to reduce the risk of COVID being on your farm with employees or customers. And then tied to that, just this week, quite a few Cornell people, extension people from around the state were kind of gathered together to develop some support for this, for making a business safety plan. And we kind of worked like crazy this past week. And it's really on the verge of getting published. And it's basically, okay, what are typical steps you could take and put in these blanks on this business safety plan correspond with the guidance that was just issued 2 days ago. And I suspect we're going to try to get those out in multiple ways, but it will be available on that Ag Workforce site soon as a document that you can download and read. And, especially at this time, the Ag Workforce Journal enriched stuff, all things related to all farms in New York State and about this COVID crisis. It's just one of those things where you go on the front page of that site and you click subscribe on agworkforce.kels, and you'll just get an email every time he has a new article, and they're very timely. So that's what I have, and I hope we have some time for a couple of questions. What are the chances that our H-2A harvest order will mean we get lots of local unemployed people applying? Will DOL be sending me inappropriate candidates? Will we have to hire them? Very concerned about ending up with a motley crew. I'll start out by saying I don't have direct experience with this. I've never hired an H-2A crew, but there was one change earlier this year where you or your agency no longer have to post local advertisements in local papers. Instead, you only have to post electronic advertisements. And so that may be a reason why you might get less local people applying. And also, right now, unemployment benefits are pretty good for the next few months. That might be another reason why people don't apply. What do you have to say, Paul?
All right, this is an issue all around the country. I'm on conference calls with people all over that most farms are having some difficulty getting their traditional domestic help back because it's very attractive right now to be on unemployment with the different incentives. With that being said, I do not think this is any time to think, well, the high unemployment, I'll be able to get a lot of people knocking on my door. I don't see that. And the comments that I'm getting from farms, again, all over the country, it's just because we have a high unemployment doesn't mean that people are willing to come out and work on the farm. So as I said in my comments, you need to be very diligent about your H-2A contracts, and you need to be reaching out as much or more than you have in the past to make sure that there's good lines of communication and factual information to your workers as to what's going on here in New York. We are not New York City. We are upstate New York.
I would add on to that about educating people before they arrive, sort of trying to understand this whole situation with COVID. There's a risk that you might not get H-2A workers. I think that's a pretty low risk at this point. The higher risk is, you really want to be doing everything you can do to prevent, an infection happening on the farm. There's always the chance that can happen. It might not be anything that you did wrong, but as I look more and more at this, so much of this, I think, is going to be dependent upon education of your workers and your other employees and your other business partners about all the steps to take, not just on the farm. You can introduce all the policies on the farm, but, what people should do in their time off on the weekends. You can't tell them what to do, just like you can't tell your uncle what to do, but you can explain why it's risky to do certain things, but not others. It might mean that even if somebody's going to socialize with somebody off the farm, you teach them about washing hands and socially distancing and sitting 6 feet apart outside or something like that. But I think this education of crews is really key. We hope to have a lot more resources and information forthcoming. There's already a ton of information on New York and CDC websites that's really well done for learning these things. And one of the other documents was a worker checklist that they published on Wednesday of sort of all the checklist of what you should do on your farm. And another one was guidance for employees and for owners, just general stuff about what to do. And it actually addresses on-farm housing of like, here's why you need to be careful. Here's why you need to wear a mask when you go into town, all of those things.